Welcome to the I Saved You, Now Do the Dishes podcast. I'm author and speaker Carrie Severson. In each episode, I'll share stories and tips from my experience with caregiving and advocacy through my husband's cancer journey. Let's get into it. Hi, and welcome back to I Saved You, Now Do the Dishes podcast. I'm your host, Carrie Severson. It's our fourth episode, and last week I told you about we lost our dog before Gavin's cancer started. And while we were laying her to rest, the radiation department called me to say, hey, I got Gavin all scheduled for all 35 fractions, but my intuition went off because we hadn't heard from the chemotherapy department. And after some digging and bugging, found out that his original chemo doctor was actually trying to bump Gavin from starting for an entire month. And we had to advocate really hard. And actually, I threatened to take Gavin's an entire account away from the hospital network if he didn't start on the day that they had originally suggested that he would. Since then, since I recorded that episode, a really important person in my life has been diagnosed with cancer. And it's incredibly triggering. So what I thought I would do today is to share what I've learned on this journey with people that are in the beginning stages of this, suspecting that they have something wrong. Because I think the hardest part of this journey is navigating and knowing what to do and where to go. Because you get a weird biopsy or you get a weird ultrasound, that you find a lump somewhere. Next step is an ultrasound. And then that result shows up in a portal. You don't really understand it. It has to go back to the original doctor who ordered it, have a conversation. And this process could take days. In our case, weeks. And then from there, you get a biopsy of something, typically. And that could take a little bit of time. In our case, it took 3 weeks to get the results back from a biopsy. And then you're given a recommendation to go see somebody else. Go find the expert here. You have to call, get on a calendar, and wait and wait and wait. And that's really hard for everybody, particularly the person it's happening to, right? The person that we're caregiving for, we're advocating for. So when my most recent person was diagnosed, it was an ultrasound. It was a physical routine that needed an ultrasound. From there, it needed a biopsy. Biopsy results come back, malignant. Okay. From there, it was like, we're not wasting time. When you're given a diagnosis of something malignant in your body, the immediate response is to go back to your doctor, your primary, whoever ordered the test for you, and be like, walk me through this. What does this mean? What do I have to do? Who do I have to talk to? And the chances are that's not their area of expertise. They're going to give you one recommendation and that's it. They'll tell you the person that they're going to refer you to is somebody that they trust, somebody that they've given all their clients to, all their patients to, but it's not their area of expertise. So what do? Here's what you do. You look up every hospital network that supports the particular diagnosis you have or that your loved one has, and you call. You get on wait list, you get on consults, you give them very specific information about what you have. It's okay that you don't have a referral. They're going to ask you a lot of questions. It's going to take a lot of time. In some cases, it'll take 45 minutes just to get set up as a new patient. But that's how this starts. You just have to get on calendars for consults at a couple of different places. But while you're waiting, ask your primary for a CT, blood panels. Those are tests that, let's just talk about cancer because that's my experience. Those are tests, CTs, blood panels, and PET scans are tests that an oncologist, a surgeon, radiologist, they're going to request. And if you can't get to those people for weeks on end, champion yourself. Be an advocate for yourself. Call your primary back and request that. That's in your right. You want to run a white blood cell count panel. You want to run a few different things, right? So that way, when you have your consult, you've advocated for yourself or your loved one, and you're walking into these brand new meetings with information to sort of kickstart this process, right? You want to keep the momentum going and get as far as you can before you have those introductory meetings. Things to do before those meetings even start. Coping skills. You'll want, both parties will need coping skills. You'll want to protect your environment and your immune system. So maybe a little less handshaking or hugging at church, or your weekly coffee connect. You're going to want to distance yourself from the coughing and the sick, because you'll want a stronger immune system to fight off disease, right? There's a lot you can do in the waiting. But when you're in it, it feels like years. And it's really hard. Those are my tips for you. For those of you in hard positions, caregiving, in the waiting game, just learning of a diagnosis, you got to champion yourself. You got to be an advocate for yourself. When Gavin first started treatment, January 22nd, 2024, we were naive. He had done a lot of prep in terms of how can he naturally cure cancer. So he had a ton of stuff sent to the house. I had coped by buying him chemo ports and a whiteboard, and that's actually a great tip. The whiteboard was phenomenal. He hated it because his life was run by it, but I loved it because he had 35 radiation fractions. He was scheduled for 7 chemotherapy sessions. Each of those departments had nurses, had blood work, had PAs, and then there were infusions, and there were social workers, and there were nutritionists, and there were speech and swallow therapists. Every single department had their own scheduling line. Everyone called. And so some days we were at the hospital for 10 hours. Some days we were at the hospital for 2 hours. I color-coded all of his appointments on a monthly basis. So he could go and look at the wall and see that on Tuesday, he had to check in at a certain time. His first appointment was 15 minutes later, and I had the entire day set up. And I did my best to consolidate his time there. And that was me trying to control it. That was me trying to cope so that he didn't have a 6-hour gap between radiation and his next thing, right? The time spent there was unproductive. Something else that we didn't know ahead of time. Mondays are a really hard day at the hospital. And I thought I was doing him a favor by packing Mondays being the longest days. So we had Monday through Friday radiation. And I thought, okay, I'll give him the weekend. He'll be able to rest. Everything will be fine. We'll get his long day up on Monday. By the time chemo wears off, he'll be ready for the weekend. Yeah, there's no controlling this freight train. He was so sick. He was very weak, and it didn't matter what day of the week it was. He was in pain pretty much by the second week of treatment. The first week of treatment was okay. He did pretty okay. Everything went well. He didn't really have anything traumatic happen. He asked for his favorite music to be played to help him relax. And that first weekend, we went back up to Sedona, which wasn't a great experience because he was just starting to feel the effects of chemo and radiation blasting into his body. But I needed it for my mental health. And so he would sleep in the hotel and I would go hike. In hindsight, he probably shouldn't have come with. He probably should have just stayed at home. But, you know, hindsight. We were naive. We thought we would, you know, not have it super affect us and we could do life pretty normal. But that didn't happen. By the second week of treatment, I was having panic attacks. My first panic attack was at a grocery store, and I could feel it coming. I texted my mom, and I told her, I'm at the grocery store. I don't remember why I'm here. I don't remember what I'm supposed to get, and I'm starting to spin. And I got the whirlies. And she's like, go into the closest aisle, hold on to the cart, and just take a deep breath. Okay. I find myself in the cereal aisle, which is even more overwhelming than I think calming. Their cereal aisle is really overwhelming nowadays. I grew up in, the 80s. Cereal is very different from the 80s. I remember like Tony the Tiger and I think Kix. I can't remember when Honeycomb came out, but like my grandparents ate grape nuts. Like that was a treat. Grape nuts with a ton of sugar, like a tablespoon of sugar, maybe 2. But nowadays there's so much. So I find myself leaning up against the grocery store, the cereal aisle, and I'm looking at a pink box with a unicorn on it. It's a protein cereal. And I'm like, protein cereal? I'm taking deep breaths. I'm doing the work I know. And I've been in burnout recovery work for a long time. So I'm doing box breath specifically. Taking big exhales, holding my breath, inhales. And pretty soon the panic attack starts to sway or pass and I start to sway. And that's usually my internal sign that this is passing. I'm out of fight or flight. I'm into sympathetic, right? I'm into relaxation. And I'm the only one in the aisle. And I can hear the music overhead. And it's like Walk Like an Egyptian. And it's music that I knew from the 80s. And so I'm in the cereal aisle. I'm like dancing, I'm laughing, I'm singing, which is another tip for you. If you are in burnout, caregiving burnout, if you find yourself in fight or flight, singing, loud singing is a great way to reset your nervous system. So I did. I sat and I sang. I swayed. I waited for the next song and I sang along to the next song. It's escaping me right now, but I knew it for a long time. I bought the box of cereal with the unicorn on it, took a picture, sent it to my mom. And that was a very common thing. I had panic attacks a lot during his treatment. It's overwhelming and I felt out of control most of the time. By the second week, Gavin had started to see the internal damage of radiation. And he started to get these second-degree burns inside his neck, down his throat. And he would spit up, cough up scabs, like chunks of throat would end up in our sink. And I started to notice blisters on his face and on his neck. by the second weekend, he couldn't drink. He was having a hard time getting anything down. They put him on a nerve ending medication even before he started. And that was pretty much it. They're like, we're going to wait as long as possible to give you anything heavy duty. So he had a nerve ending. He was able to take anti-inflammatory and something for pain. And that was it, over-the-counter stuff. By the second weekend, he was in tremendous pain. And they tell you in the beginning, come to the ER if you need help. Don't wait. And so it's the middle of the night. I could hear him in pain at our kitchen sink. And the scabs in his neck and his throat would like give him panic attacks and cause him to like not be able to breathe at times. So I heard him with the kitchen sink, he pulled the faucet out and made it a hose, and he was like trying to get scabs out of his mouth and so that he could swallow and he could breathe normal. And finally I'm like, you know what, dude, we should go to the ER. And he's like, no, I don't want to go. There's other people that need that bed more than me. I'm like, no, we're going. He wouldn't agree. It's the middle of the night. I called the on-call doctor that we were given a phone number for. And I'm like, this is a situation. This is what's happening. And already only the second weekend. And Gavin says for the first time, I think the cure is killing me faster. I don't know how much more of this I can take. The doctor's like, okay, well, pain level 1 to 10, where are you? He's like 8. We've got 5 more weeks of this. And I knew it as soon as he said it. I don't know how much more of this I could take. I could feel it in my body. I knew he was going to want to quit. So asked the doctor, what do you recommend? What should we do? And he's like, I think you should go to the ER for pain management. And so Gavin shook his head and he's like, somebody else is going to need that bed more than me. And I'm like, okay, I'll give you until 9 a.m. It's 4 a.m. right now. I'm giving you till 9. If you are still in pain at 9, your ass is in the car and we're driving you across town to the ER. This is the plan. He agreed to it. We were in the ER by 9:30. He was hooked up to medication a little bit later, and he was able to coast the rest of the day with less pain. The next day, pain was there again. It was like every day the pain showed up a little bit stronger. And that's because when you have radiation Monday through Friday, the radiation sort of impacts upon one another. And the longer you go, the worse it gets. So I found myself at a pot dispensary for the first time at 8 a.m. on a Sunday. I was the only one in the parking lot. And the guy behind the door looks at me and he goes, first time? And he said it in a way where I was like, why do you say it like that? It was more of a statement than a question. But I shook my head yes. And then I was like, my husband has cancer. He's in a lot of pain. I need help. And it came out just like all at once. And he's like, oh, you're in luck. We have a special 2-for-1 raspberry orange. So he walks me to this back wall, hands me 2 bags of gummies. I'm back at the house like 30 minutes later. And Gavin takes one for the first time and pain is gone until it's not. And that was the thing, is it's so hard. We're like chasing relief, right? It's incredibly hard. You're constantly looking for solutions, and you can't really rely on anybody. You got to find them yourself. You've got to dig, and you've got to take care of you and your loved one. And there are resources that we depended on. And so things that I think are national, Lasagna Love is a great organization. Definitely check them out. We always depended on CaringBridge, like getting the word out through CaringBridge made everything a lot easier. Somebody told us about a cleaning service that supported cancer families. I called them and was able to get the house cleaned a couple of times for free while he had cancer, which really helped me. But by the time that third week rolled around, we were in a very different arena, and trouble really started then. The worst day that we had was the Monday starting that third week. It's actually a really funny story. It's how I found my alter ego throughout this whole thing, which I'll share next time. Thank you so much for tuning in to the next episode, the 4th episode of I Saved You, Now Do the Dishes. I really appreciate you being here. If you are a caregiver, I love you, I see you, I support you. And remember, it's totally okay to have somebody else do the dishes. Until next time.